Welcome to Terror in Tandem, a podcast about finding entertainment in the macabre. Hosted by the knowledgeable and lovable Laura and Richard Mathiasen. Each episode, we discuss the horror genre, from books to film to TV and beyond. Sometimes even from the beyond. You can find us online at terrorintandem.com and on Instagram at terrorintandem.
Hi.
Hello, welcome.
We're going to be doing another remake episode.
It's a recurring segment, y'all.
Yeah.
Look at that. Look how established we are. That
I
we
know.
have recurring segments, luxury properties.
We're starting to repeat ourselves.
It's amazing. It's just...
We're starting to repeat ourselves.
It's amazing.
So today's remake episode.
I'm glad that stopped.
Today's remake episode is Let the Right One In and Let Me In.
Yes.
Vampires.
Vampire.
Right.
So yeah, 2008's Swedish film Let the Right One In and 2010's American remake Let Me In.
Although, the word vampire wasn't really used much in either film.
Oh gosh, I'm thinking if I feel like...
And we should just say vampire because it was only one.
True. It may have come up once, but you're right. It wasn't like repeated over and over.
Yeah.
Yeah. Which is weird because
if
I met a vampire, that's like all I would say.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
You'd be like, Gizmo, make me one. Make me a vampire.
I mean, that's the thing. Yeah. From What We Do in the Shadows.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, I feel like I'm so steeped in the lore of different kinds of horror that like I'd be immediately like within seconds like, oh God, zombies. Oh shit, it's a vampire. I know exactly what to do. Werewolf,
Yeah.
So keep me around for that apocalypse.
Yeah. I'm agree to disagree. I've seen you around bugs.
Oh my God.
I've seen you around bugs and stuff.
Yeah, I've seen you around bugs.
I'm not claiming that I would be like walking up to a werewolf and being like, hey, full moon tonight.
Bugs and werewolves, two very different things.
Yeah, one can kill you and one can't.
Listen, we're doing a bugs episode now. That's what you've earned
I don't
yourself.
want to do a bugs episode. I don't
all
like
this back
bugs.
and forth. We're doing a slugs and bugs.
Oh, that's cool. Slugs and bugs.
I am actually thinking about it now.
One of our commercials could be,
we don't choose our
running
commercials.
out of slugs.
I mean, we could always
running out of bugs.
we could always hope for the best, but our advertisers
Bring
come to
your
us.
jugs of slugs and bugs. All right, so Let the Right One In. I want to start with that one because it's the first one.
Do it.
So, it's tagged as a horror/romance.
Yeah. Makes sense.
It's based on the novel of the same name, and the author of the novel, John Lindquist, he also wrote the screenplay for this film.
Yeah.
It came out in 2008, and it takes place in 1982. So that's sort of the scene setting.
And
it's Swedish.
You really, really feel that.
Yeah.
That time period.
I would say more so in the remake.
Yeah.
Just because I never lived in Sweden.
That's true.
So,
You're probably, it's definitely a more familiar 80s setting because it's 80s America and not 80s Stockholm.
And the music too has, there's definitely more pop music from the 80s in the Let Me In.
Yes.
I don't know if you know this about me, but I did not grow up in Sweden.
Huh.
Which is where
I didn't. I just assumed you did.
This film originates.
Yeah. I've as long as I've known you, just always assumed you grew up in Stockholm. That's a surprise to me that you didn't.
I do have Stockholm syndrome from being with you, but...
Oh. Hey, you know what? 10 years and going.
So the film's directed by Thomas Alfredson. And why don't you talk about who's in the film?
Yeah, well, it's starring, and I again, apologize, I'm doing my best with these. It's starring a young actor named Quora Hedebrandt as Oscar, the young boy. Oscar. And Lena Leandersson as Ellie. Now, Lena Leandersson has only been in about 2 or 3 movies and nothing since 2013, according to IMDb, which is... a shame. She's so good in this movie.
They're both really great.
Oh yeah. The cast. That's the thing about both films. The cast is incredible. The other main character, of course, is Joaquin, who in the American version is just referred to as father.
So this is, definitely a vampire. It's a vampire story. You're going to see some vampire tropes being hit upon.
Oh, for sure.
Especially the being invited in. There's a really great scene in both films, actually, of where the vampire character is being invited in by the boy character. Is not being invited in by the boy character. She says she needs to be. She walks in anyway and starts bleeding.
Yeah, it's. I don't know if I've ever seen that on film before. They show the consequences of what happens if a vampire enters a dwelling before it's invited, and it's horrifying. It's really, really effective.
Yeah.
And
I've seen it in like Vampire Diaries. They would
for real?
collapse on the floor because of severe pain.
Oh,
Not bleeding,
wow.
but like it would be like an auditory disruptance, like a ringing.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
I guess I've never seen anything like that. In the movie version, she hemorrhages from her eyes, from her mouth, her nose, her ears.
All bleeding down her head.
It's
and everything
terrible.
Until
Yeah.
he finally says, "Come in, come in."
Yeah, it's like her pores are weeping blood. It's really, really terrible. And yeah, a horrified Oscar/Owen is moved to scream out, oh my God, I invite you in.
Other vampire tropes, there's almost an invisible wall that they can't cross.
I feel like that I've seen. Yeah. I think maybe that's the way they did it on Buffy, was like they would
and True Blood, I think.
They would hit like a mime wall, like a mime in a box.
So the music was scored by a Swedish composer who is said to have contrasted the visuals by creating a score that was very romantic and very hopeful.
Yeah.
So juxtapositioning that against the violence of, what it takes to keep a vampire alive. And the Slavic National Symphony Orchestra performed the score.
Wow, that's neat.
Yeah.
I mean, the birthplace of the vampire myth.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's fantastic.
It has a 98% Rotten Tomato score.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I'm just going to level with everyone. This movie, Let the Right One In, is one of my all-timers. It's one of my favorite vampire movies of all time, but it's also one of my favorite movies of all time.
It won several awards. It premiered at the Gothenburg Film Festival in Sweden, where the director, Alfredson, won the Nordic Film Prize.
Nice.
It also went on to win
like
several other
ice.
awards. Yes, including Best Narrative Award at the Tribeca Film Festival.
Ah, that's De Niro's festival. So basically, Let the Right One In, it's about 12-year-old Oscar.
I would say that it's the summary for both movies.
You know what? I agree with you there. Both movies, plot-wise, they are pretty similar. So 12-year-old Oscar, in the original, his name is Owen in the remake, lives with his mother. I'm just going to talk about the original first.
Yeah.
Lives with his mother, a single mom going through a very contentious divorce in kind of a shitty apartment building in a suburb of Stockholm. It's winter. It's very bleak. You get a sense right away that Oscar is a loner. He's terribly bullied at school, and he has a developing dark side, which is not really a surprise given how badly he's bullied all the time and that he has no role models or male figures in his life, but it's still pretty hard to watch, this little kid entertaining these violent thoughts. So one night, a strange young girl named Ellie moves in with her father named Joaquin into the apartment, and they strike up, Ellie and Oscar strike up a friendship.
Not right away.
No, she's pretty strange.
She says, "I can't be your friend."
She comes out in the winter in the snow with bare feet and no jacket on, and she doesn't seem affected by the cold at all. She does say right away, "I can't be your friend." She tells him she's not a girl, despite the fact she's dressed like a girl, has a bit of an androgynous look, but it's all assumptions are made that this is a girl. Now they do find a commonality in each other in their shared darkness. As it turns out, Ellie is not really a girl. They are a vampire. So the situation is that Ellie lives with this man, Joaquin, who goes out and kills people and drains their blood, takes it home so she can live. Problem is, over the course of the movie, is Joaquin he's getting quite old, and you get the sense that they've been together a long time. He starts getting very sloppy. He fucks up, and as he's about to get discovered, what does he do? It's you say it.
Dumps acid on his
He
face.
dumps acid on his face.
In order to not be recognized by the police and to essentially save Ellie's, story.
So it's an extremely graphic and horrifying scene, but it also really shows the lengths that this man goes to protect Ellie's identity. The cops are kind of closing in. He's getting sloppy. People are finding the bodies. There's a very memorable scene where school children, Oscar's classmates, find one of the recent victims under the ice of a frozen lake.
She actually goes to the hospital and drains him of all his blood, too.
Yes. So he scars himself horribly with this acid, and he's on the brink of death, essentially. Ellie goes to visit him in the hospital, on the side of the building. She doesn't go through the front door. It's not that she drains him. He offers. He knows that he's dying. She does drain him because she can't stop. Yeah, well, she's weak and she's hungry. So he offers himself and then falls from the hospital, desanguinated from the hospital building and dies. So he can't betray her or give her up under questioning.
That's not the only interesting hospital scene.
It's a very dark but also beautiful moment.
Yes. It's very touching. His essentially last, honor to her.
That's definitely one of the strengths of this movie, is that it makes you feel for monsters.
Yeah.
'Cause Joaquin is he's a murderer. He kills innocent people and drains them of their blood to keep this unholy creature alive.
Yep.
So that's basically the plot of the movie. At the end, Oscar and Ellie get on a train together. She's in a like a big box, like an old style trunk, a steamer trunk.
Can I
yeah.
Go back a little bit? So Oscar and Ellie ultimately become a boyfriend girlfriend, as much as a 12-year-old can be.
Yeah, it's actually quite sweet.
It is. He does find out that she's a vampire.
Yes.
Because he wants a blood bond to seal their friendship and relationship, and cuts his hand open and drips all this blood all over the floor.
Rookie
and she
mistake.
Can't handle herself.
Well, yeah, he doesn't know that
he
doesn't know she's a vampire. This is how he finds out.
So he still wants to have a relationship with her.
He initially is repulsed by it.
Yeah.
Because they do a great job, and she feeds on this blood that hits the floor like a wild beast. She has no control.
She can't handle it. She becomes a monster.
Yeah, she does. And she has a moment of clarity where she's like ashamed of it. Like, don't look at me. But she does lose control.
There's an investigator that comes to her apartment and finds her in the bathtub, and Oscar stops him.
Not in the original. In the original, it's actually Virginia's boyfriend who finds her in the bathtub.
Right. He's not the investigator, though?
No, he's not an investigator. So she attacks another one of their neighbors, Virginia. In the original,
kill her.
No, in the original movie, there is like they really develop more of the neighbors and townspeople. Virginia being one of them, and she's attacked by Ellie, who's desperate and starving. But Ellie doesn't kill her, and the problem is, in the lore established in this movie, if you don't kill, but you've bitten them, they turn into a vampire. And in my favorite scene in the movie, and we'll get into this a little bit later in the differences, Virginia, as she's turning, burns up in the sunlight. So it's her boyfriend / husband. I can't quite remember.
Bursts into flames.
Yes. He goes on like a revenge quest, and he's the one who finds Ellie sleeping during the day in the bathtub.
Right.
But in the original, quite memorably, Oscar warns her so that she's able to wake up and kill him.
Yeah, he helps her, and then she leaves. And then we'll talk about these different scenes in the movie, but essentially Oscar's bullies try to drown him, and then Ellie shows up. And later they, like you said, escape by train.
Yeah.
and she's in a box and he is not, and they're doing their little Morse code.
Yeah.
And that it's like a really sweet.
Do you know what they tap to each
ending.
other?
Kiss me.
Yeah. They actually, so I looked it up. They in both versions of the film, she taps from inside the box something like kisses, and he taps back small kiss.
Yeah.
Or like little kiss. Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's the plot of the movie.
And then So Let Me In is essentially the same plot.
Very, very, very similar.
It's an American version. So It came out in 2010, written by Matt Reeves, directed by Matt Reeves.
Yes.
And Matt Reeves directed Planet of the Apes movies, Cloverfield, and the recent Batman movie, Batman.
At this point, he had done Cloverfield. He had really burst onto the scene. Do you want to tell our Cloverfield story?
That I couldn't handle the shaky camera.
We went to see Cloverfield back in 2008. We were pretty new to dating. We were dating at that time, but not long into our relationship. And anybody who's seen the movie, it's a found footage, shaky cam kind of movie. And my beautiful date ran outside in the middle of the movie, and
not even middle.
No,
within the first half hour, I would say.
And were you barfing in the garbage cans?
Yeah.
So I didn't end up seeing...
I got so dizzy. I can't handle movies like that. So
I mean, it actually did that to a lot of people. That was a common complaint about Cloverfield. So I left too. I didn't stay and watch the rest.
Did you ever watch it?
I did. Years later, I watched the rest of it, and it's great. But at this point, he had just made Cloverfield. He went on afterwards to do Escape from Planet of the Apes and Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, two incredible movies, and just most recently did the Batman.
Yeah, that's what I said.
Yeah. I like to say things you say.
Are we back to our repeating?
Repeating
is the thing you're saying?
Isn't this Pete repeat?
No, remake.
Oh, got it.
So cast as the Ellie character, who is called Abby in this version, is Chloe Grace Moretz. And Owen, who is the Oscar character, played by Cody Smith McPhee.
Yeah. Nightcrawler.
Yes,
from the X-Men
Nightcrawler,
movies.
correct.
Yeah.
And then Richard Jenkins,
oh,
he's so good,
king,
plays the father, Thomas.
Does he have a name?
Yes, Thomas.
Oh.
It's on his IMDb page as Thomas.
Oh, I thought he was just the father.
I think in the movies IMDb it's the father, but in Richard Jenkins' IMDb it's Thomas.
Interesting.
It takes place in Los Alamos, New Mexico.
Famously the site of America's nuclear program.
Yes, 1983. So not a big difference in timing, but it was much more of a 80s vibe because I grew up in America, so I felt it.
Yeah, it was probably just that it's more recognizable to us because that was more similar to our experience. Minus the vampires.
Originally, Hammer Films acquired the rights for the English adaptation of the film, and it was offered to Alfredson, the original director of the Swedish film, to do an American version, and he declined. I
don't understand. A lot of directors do that. You know, Hideo Nakata directed The Ring 2 and then the American version of The Ring 2. Takashi Shimizu did all of the Ju-ons, Japanese and American. Why would you want to remake your own movie?
Yeah.
It just seems so boring. I guess, like, if you're a perfectionist or something, but, like, I don't know. There's only so many hours in the day. Maybe it's a
courtesy. Maybe it's a courtesy, and some people accept.
Maybe it's for Munties.
Maybe. And then Reeves signed on and wrote the screenplay and directed the movie. He said that he wanted to make an adaptation of the novel rather than a remake of the Swedish film.
Interesting.
Because he thought the film, the Swedish version, was a beautiful interpretation of the book. The plot was maintained, but many changes were made from the original, specifically names of the characters and location. He told the actors not to watch the original.
Probably for the best.
And then, you know, we will talk about this a little bit, but he kept the 80s timeline in the film. Let Me In premiered at the Toronto International Film Festival and was placed on several critics' top 10 lists. Some liked how true to the original it was, while others criticized it from being too derivative from the Swedish film. Michael...
Which is interesting, because when I go into the differences between the two, I have the exact opposite criticism of it.
Right. Michael Giacchino scored the film, previously worked on Alias and Lost, among some other shows.
You've definitely heard his stuff before.
When I watched this version, I was like, it sounds like Lost.
Yeah.
And then many 80 notable songs were in the movie, from Culture Club, Bowie, Blue Oyster Cult. So again, the plot is very, very similar for both.
But it is not a shot-for-shot remake. It's not like
It is
Psycho.
not.
It's Matt Reeves is an incredibly talented director, and it has its own
It's laid out differently. The start is different. The finish is similar.
But even just visually, he's a very different director than Tomas Alfredson. And his style is all over this movie.
So why don't we take a break, and then when we get back, we'll talk a little bit about the similarities and differences that were notable to us.
Sounds great.
Curious how to stock your shed with the tools that get the job of hunting, chasing, and terrorizing done? Do you dream of hacking out those pesky camp counselors at the lake? Do you have an unrelenting passion for revenge? Well, when your old standard kitchen knives and carving tools won't do, it's time to head down to Uncle Jason's Knives and Blades. Never sharpened, but always sharp, Uncle Jason's specialty killing tools will slice through all of those in your path without effort or exhaustion. You can choose from a variety of tools, rusted and weighted for your specifications. Intimidate onlookers, trespassers, and unsuspecting travelers alike with our custom tool display boards. Whether in your basement or shed, our discreet teams will come in and transform your space into its terrifyingly best. Head over to County Route 24, turn left at the no trespassing sign, and head into the barn and talk to one of our specialists. At Uncle Jason's Knives and Blades, we will fulfill our promise of only the most sinister and menacing knives and blades around. So come on down. This is a fake ad for a fake product and a horror-themed podcast. We do not condone nor endorse killing people with fancy custom weapons you made in your shed.
What a fine product from a fine company. Wouldn't you agree?
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. Remember, we are doing something right now.
Right. I forgot.
Yeah. So, them's the movies. Now, we mentioned earlier that these are all based on a novel. So I'm going to get into a little bit of the differences between the three.
We are going to get into
Yes, we. We're both going to do it.
This is a terror in tandem, not terror
Emphasis
individual.
on the tandem.
Let this individual terrorize you.
So
that's your spin-off.
I'm going to throw it out there right off the bat. I greatly prefer the original to the remake. I just do.
I find each one has its own value.
I agree with you completely. They do. The remake, Let Me In, is a very good movie. It's totally worth a watch. And if I had never seen Let the Right One In, I would probably rate it much higher. However, I did see Let the Right One In. And actually, I only saw Let Me In this year for this podcast because I put off watching it for that long. As I said, the original is just one of my favorite movies. So some of the key differences between the three versions of the story. Now, the differences are perhaps most pronounced in the character of Ellie/Abby. Anyone who has seen the original movie, and I was certainly one of these people, I was waiting for a very certain specific reveal. I wasn't sure it was going to happen because Lena Leandersson, the original actor, had a very androgynous look to her. Chloe Grace Moretz, very obviously feminine from the get-go. Clearly feminine. So the
very
reason I'm
innocent, though.
Certainly, but very clearly a woman, a girl. Now, the reason I bring that up is because in the original movie, there is a very shocking scene where Ellie reveals that she is not a girl. she lifts up her dress and shows her mutilated genitals, that she was a boy who was castrated quite barbarously.
Because that's pretty directly taken from the book.
Well, in the book, it's even more stated. Ellie's real name is Elias or Elias. They're centuries old, and they were castrated before they were turned. It implied that the person that turned them was a real sadist, mutilated them, and they've lived as a boy, they've lived as a girl. They live however they need to survive.
Well, did you know that the actress, Lena Lee Anderson's voice, was dubbed over by another actor in order to make her voice, which was pretty high pitched and young. I mean, she's a young
very
girl,
young, yeah.
More androgynous in the movie.
Wow. Like I said, this is like my favorite movie, and I did not know that.
Chloe Grace Moritz's Abby does say I'm not a girl, but it's more implied I'm a vampire.
That's the thing.
That's the second part of the sentence, as opposed to Ellie, who's saying I'm not a girl,
and literally meaning I am
they.
not. Yeah, I am not a girl. So that's the thing. So in the American version, there's none of that at all. It doesn't play into it. It's never hinted at. She does say I'm not a girl several times, and you really are led to believe she means I'm not a human girl.
Mm-hmm, right.
But there is no mention that they ever lived any part of their lives as a boy, which was a real shame, honestly, because it's such a... It adds so much to the character. It's such a tragic and fascinating element to the character, but there's also part of me that just wonders... Was this taken out because it was determined American audiences just couldn't handle it,
I guess
wouldn't
you have
tolerate
to ask
it?
Matt Reeves.
Well, certainly it's when you watch foreign films, one of the great things about them is it really does give you an insight into not only the culture, but what the culture tolerates. There are certain things in European films that you just don't see in mainstream American movies, and anything with kids and sexuality, certainly. Now, on the other hand, they certainly sexualized the relationship between the children a lot more in the American version than they did in the Swedish version.
And you're talking about not a child.
Yes, it's not a child. Centuries-old being.
It's a vampire.
Not a human.
150 years
it's a creature.
old, I believe.
Yeah.
So even that, maybe that alone was enough for Matt Reeves to say, well, people are going to have to get a handle on, A, who this father really is to the vampire character. Yeah. B, I'm asking you to believe that this 150-year-old being is having a relationship with a 12-year-old boy. Mm-hmm. That's enough. I don't need to go into the...
anyone who's seen Twilight, that was always my question, was like, all these dudes hanging out at this high school are like 400 years older than you.
The same thing with Vampire Diaries.
Yeah. I get it. When you hit a certain age, it's just meaningless. Mm-hmm. You're infinity, so you're nothing. But yeah, that was such a... Having seen the original, the absence of that entire plot line and theme from the remake was just something I couldn't get over. It was like an empty hole.
Abby, Chloe Grace Moretz's portrayal seems much more childlike.
Yes.
Much more innocent, as opposed to Ellie, who is far scarier
and
more
wise,
menacing, more haunting.
You definitely get the sense that this is an old being in a young body.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes, even by the way she moves. But Abby moves, very much like an insecure,
she's
scared
coquettish.
child. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now the thing is I have a theory about that. We'll get into that. So one of the other major character difference is between Håkan, played by Per Ragnar.
Let's talk about that.
Yeah, played by Per Ragnar in the original.
Talk about adding a whole nother horrific
subtracting
element.
and adding.
Yeah.
So Richard Jenkins beautifully playing the role in the remake, because everything Richard Jenkins does is great. He's great in everything. He's always good. I challenge you, Richard Jenkins, be mediocre in something. I don't think you can do it. So in the original Swedish version of the movie, Håkan, his relationship with Ellie is never clearly or overtly stated. There is an element of father-daughter. There is also a hint of perhaps a deeper affection than that. There is enough love and affection and devotion for this man to mutilate himself horrifically and then allow himself to be killed and thrown out of a hospital, literally out of a second-story hospital building, or it was like fourth story. Now, in the remake, they add an element that I actually kind of really like.
Are you going to talk about the book's representation?
Yeah, I am.
Okay.
I am. So in the remake, this character played by Richard Jenkins, you find out towards the end that he was essentially the original Owen. So that when he was a child, he met Abby, they fell in love, and he's ostensibly been spending decades traveling with her and protecting her as their roles kind of grew from lovers into something else. He's an old man and she's in a young body.
And I think it was the father role for everybody else to understand why this old man has this young girl with him.
Yes, but there's a certain sadness in the way Richard Jenkins portrays his character because you can tell they're not lovers anymore.
Yeah, he brings a lot of pain and emotion to his portrayal.
He still loves her.
I felt more empathy for him, his portrayal, than I did for Joaquin.
Well, it's easier too because you're not given much in the way of motivation for Joaquin.
Right. It's hard to understand like his intention.
But it's easy to understand falling in love with this enigmatic being, this beautiful, ageless, weird, supernatural creature.
A real caretaker vibe.
Yeah. And it's very sad. And it does add an element when you realize that as a young boy, he played the exact same role that Cody Smith-McPhee's Owen is playing. It's pretty sinister. Is Abby capable of love? Is she just lure in a new caretaker every generation?
And then so dispose manipulative of them. The way she does it too. And we realize that reveal with Owen. Now, he's the one that finds the picture
and he seems fine with
puts it all together.
I
would say he doesn't seem fine with it, but I think he's like,
he doesn't run.
Oh, okay. I guess
he does.
She does this.
He accepts his. He seems to accept his role, knowing that he has a. It's just it definitely in the original version their relationship seemed more genuine. In this, it seems this really throws in a sort of Lady Macbeth machinations quality to it. I love because it makes Abby seem quite sinister and like an evil villain. But I don't know. I also like that the original had a bit of sweetness to it.
Well, yeah, the remake almost feels like he is accepting and stepping into this new role.
Yeah.
Eyes wide open.
I mean, he does have agency. He's not being manipulated necessarily. He knows what's happening.
As opposed to Oscar, who might not quite know. We don't know he knows.
I guess Owen in the remake, he's deciding what's a better life, traveling with this creature I know is using me, but
who accepts me and doesn't treat me badly,
or living with my mother who ignores me, and
I can take out my violent tendencies.
Yes, that's the other thing, is free to explore his growing dark side.
Yes.
So that's a pretty big change. Now in the novel, we can go on record. The novel is darker than both versions of the movie. It's much gorier. It's there are a lot of characters that were cut from both versions of the films. A lot of scenes. Joaquin's death in the book, wildly different, and I would argue much better in the movies, much more effective. So in the book, the arrangement between Joaquin and Ellie is he's a pedophile, and she's the basically perfect for a pedophile because she'll never not be a little child, but she's not a child. She's ancient. She's old and wise, and has so that's the sort of quid pro quo between the two, is he is allowed to be a pedophile, and she gets blood and victims.
And so the original movie doesn't make that an overt plot point, but it doesn't eliminate it from a possibility.
In allowing the audience to fill in the blanks, that is certainly one avenue you could go down. I think in my sort of wide-eyed innocence, I chose to think that it was a little bit more of a caretaker. Maybe there's some history. She saved his life at some point. But in the novel, he's a straight up pedophile monster, and makes a deal with another monster. It's very complicated.
Yeah.
I will say that I think simplifying it for the film, simplifying that relationship and removing some elements like that, it works because you need the audience to feel something. If you're already giving the audience a monstrous character to quote unquote sympathize with, you got to throw us a bone. You got to give us something to hold on to. Håkon's death in the movie is so effective because he's not painted like a child raping monster. So you care when he dies. If that had been made clear in the movie, if that was an element of his character in the movie, I wouldn't have given a shit about him pouring acid all over his face. Been like, all right.
And then Richard Jenkins playing, the father, Thomas, in the remake conjures up even more sympathy because of how it's portrayed. It seems really sad. It's a very sad
from the get-go,
end.
his movements and the way he holds his body, he really gives across the sense of a beaten down, broken man at the end of his rope. And just doesn't want to do this anymore. Maybe never wanted to do it.
Right.
Yeah, never wanted to do it in the first place. Was never a natural born killer. And he's constantly making mistakes.
He also made me feel that, the mistakes are getting
worse,
dangerous for her.
Yes.
If he doesn't stop somehow, then she's gonna be found out.
Yeah. One of the big bummer differences for me was in the character of Virginia. Now, in Let the Right One In, Virginia has a lot more of characterization. She's one of the townspeople. She's the one that Ellie attacks but doesn't kill, and she dies in the hospital room. Now, we have a lot more time with Virginia before she dies, though. We see animals react to her. There's a memorable scene where she's attacked by cats. Yeah. She knows what's happening to her in the original. She starts feeding on herself because she sees blood. Mm-hmm. So when she's in the hospital, she knows what's happening to her, and she asks her husband to open the blinds, and she knows what that's going to do. And it's
because she's already shown sensitivity to sunlight.
Yes, exactly. She's essentially committing suicide because she doesn't want to live as a monster. Mm-hmm. And she's starting to get urges.
Or she doesn't want to do what it takes to survive.
Yes. So it's now the shot is from within the room, staring straight on at Virginia's hospital bed.
It's a fixed shot.
It does track in very slowly, but it's almost like a static shot. The movement is very, very slight. It all takes place in the room, and Virginia she on one side is her husband, on the other side is another man, a nurse, somebody, and she bursts into flames. The flames reach the ceiling. It is an incredible tableau. Now, in the remake, first of all, they add this whole thing where Oscar Owen in the remake is spying on his neighbors and wearing a serial killer mask. That's not in the original. It's a little weird. So he's spying on his neighbors, and Virginia's one of his neighbors, and he sees her naked. So you get the gratuitous boob shot. And the scene where she dies in the hospital, she's feeding on herself as a nurse comes in and opens the blinds, and she bursts into flames, and the nurse catches fire, and the husband that we don't really know too well tries to get in, and there's a new character in the movie that's not in the original, played by the memorable King, Elias Koteas. He's the policeman. He holds him back from going in the room. It's shot from outside the room, not in the room. And by having the nurse catch fire and die, it's certainly horrifying. I mean, it's a spectacular scene, but it takes focus away from Virginia. And by having Virginia not be the one to order the blinds open, it takes all agency away from her. I mean, in the original movie, this was a woman consciously deciding to kill herself before she did something she could never take back.
Well, I can tell you what my take is. So the adults in the remake, Let Me In, are not even important. Much like 80s adults and parenting style was totally hands-off, almost insignificant. We don't even see the face of the mother.
That's true.
It's blurred out.
In Let Me In, in every scene with Owen's mother, you never see her face. Not
so
once.
the adult roles and relationships aren't significant
She's like
at
Charlie
all
Brown's teacher
in the remake.
Yeah.
It like I said, it truly captures that hands-off adult-child relationship. So I feel in that way, that sort of plays out in the same way where you're not exploring these adult relationships that extent. And the serial killer mask that Owen is wearing is because there's a serial killer on the loose.
No,
and
I get it.
Emulating
the thing is
what he wants
in the novel,
to be.
In the novel, Virginia is a middle-aged grandmother. In the original movie, Let the Right One In, she's like just a nice-looking regular person.
In the house, in the apartment.
In the American remake, she's like a 20-something beautiful model who gets naked, and it's like
risque.
All right, I don't know. It just I missed that Virginia was a real person in the remake. In the remake, she was window dressing, and then really she didn't push the action forward at all. She didn't do anything. And also they made her like this weird, she had like a tiny little designer dog, and she was like clearly like kind of bitchy. Whereas in the original, she was just a person.
I just saw it as the adults were an afterthought. The children were the focus.
I guess. Yeah. But both of those scenes, Virginia's death in both movies, beautifully shot, visually striking. I just think the original hit much, much harder.
I do think Chloe Grace Moretz's portrayal is much more nuanced in
she's
the remake.
such a good actor. Yeah.
The original definitely has more of an exploration in gender norms, although the bullying of the Owen character in the remake is very focused heavily on
homophobia. Yeah. That's something. The bullying in the original movie, it doesn't have this, but in the American remake, the bullying is all homophobic based.
Yeah.
And honestly, as someone who went through the American school system in the 80s and 90s and was bad at sports and liked poetry, it was true to life. I mean, 99% of bullying was, based on sexuality and gender interpretations. That's the nicest way I can say it. So seeing that on film, that I think if it was represented any other way, it wouldn't have seemed like real bullying. It's hard to watch.
Are you telling me you're a vampire familiar?
I wish. Oh, you said familiar. No, I don't want to be that. So, so the bullying was it's hard to watch, but it
is really hard to watch.
For anybody that's been on the receiving end. It is authentic.
Both films do that really well.
They do, yeah.
And sadly,
and
they
when
do it really well.
In the moments where Oscar's burgeoning inner darkness is starting to show through, these moments of bullying and the loneliness of his life, if they don't excuse anything, but they certainly put it into context. So the last bit of differences in comparison I want to get into is the denouement, the ending, the incredible ending of this movie. Trigger warning, it does take place in a school, and it does involve violence against school kids. So at the end of the movie, Oscar/Owen, in both versions, his bullies lure him into the swimming pool area of the school gym after hours, so there's no one there. And they kind of trick him out there. They trap him, and they're drowning him. Now, in both versions, there's like an alpha bully that's drowning Owen, and it definitely goes too far. Now, the difference is here. In the original version, in Let the Right One In, Ellie shows up, and one of the bullies who is thinks this is going too far invites her into the school. She shows up outside, and they show that happening. Now, all from the camera doesn't. It's all from Oscar's point of view, underwater. Not his point of view, but you stay focused on him under the water, being held down, and you can hear.
Almost makes it scarier.
It's absolutely terrifying. You hear screams. First, you hear like shuffle and yelling, and then screams, and then you can see the water being disturbed, and you hear things breaking, and the whole time, Oscar keeps his eyes shut closed, and when he comes up out of the water, he just smiles because he sees Ellie. Now, in the remake, same kind of thing, except Chloe Grace Moretz she's not let in. She bursts through the glass ceiling above the pool like a motherfucking superhero. Just busts into this place. It's still shot under the water, so you still see, Owen's face. He's got his eyes open in this version, and there are severed heads and body parts and blood buckets just falling into the pool left and right. And you're like, okay. I mean, in the original, I got a very horrifying, terrible sense of what could possibly be happening. And then in the remake, it just looked like they dumped a chum bucket into the water. And it was like, I don't know. I'm not an anti-gore person, but in this, it needs to fit, And
I mean,
this movie definitely ramped up the violence from the original. The remake is much gorier than the 2008 version.
Except in this scene.
Yes, but it just was like, it was almost like a Sam Raimi moment. Like, it was really over the top. There was a point where like a head dumps in the water, and it's like, it got a bit goofy, I thought. Now, in the novel and the original movie, one of the bullies survives. And I always thought that's always great to have one person live to like tell the legend that, the cops aren't going to believe it. But that story's going to be told for decades at that school. And the remake of the movie, no one lives. There's no one to tell the tale. So it's just kind of, I guess, these murders continue.
The serial killer is still out there, though.
Yeah.
So that's sort of the rub, is they thought that the father figure was the serial killer, but he, dumped the acid all over his face, so they don't know if it was him. That's why the investigator shows up. The
one last thing, in addition to the gore, which, again, I'm a gore hound, ladies and gentlemen. I love it, but it's got to fit. It's got to fit the narrative. And there were moments in this movie where I was like, it's cool, but does it need to be there?
Well, as you were mentioning the Virginia character, why make her young, and
why make her
nudity's sake?
And there's always this moment in a Hollywood film, especially so you're filming in a rundown apartment block, but everyone who lives there is the most beautiful person I've ever seen in my life. I mean, come on, it's okay to have people just look like people. So I was going to say, in addition to the gore, there are also some moments in the remake of some CGI. And to Matt Reeves' benefit, he does a pretty good job with it. He keeps shadows, he limits it, but it's 2010 and it's still pretty janky, and you really can tell. I think Matt Reeves is an unbelievably talented director. He does his best with that, but it just wasn't ready yet. And when you're watching movies like that, from a modern perspective, it just stands out like a sore thumb. It really does. So I know that those moments are supposed to be cool. They're the opposite. It's like, oh, I can tell this is the computer part. Those don't exist in the original, and I would say for the better. Yeah. The original definitely. Well, actually, that's all the comparisons I'm really going to do. And you had mentioned liking both of these versions, which I do too. So maybe we can find a way to recommend them both.
Sure, yeah. So if you'd rather watch a more raw, natural, spiritual version that is not dubbed, sorry, that has subtitles.
Yeah. You can probably get it dubbed, but if it's not, if it's possible for you to read subtitles, I always recommend that, because then you're getting the actor's, original performance.
Yeah. So an original film as well is Let the Right One In. So watch that. If you rather have a more slick, character-driven, coming-of-age film starring, recognizable people to American audiences, and maybe
some straight-up movie stars in this movie.
Yeah, maybe you're not really jazzed about subtitles, then let me in. I think you'll get the same overall feelings and sensations that you would in either, but if you want to compare and contrast both, I would say watch both of them.
Look, some days you want nacho Doritos, some days you want Cool Ranch, right. But they're both Doritos. I agree. They're both solid movies. They do, I think, cater to different aesthetics. The original is much more of a slow burn. It's more of a character study on these people, their relationships with each other, and it's there's less of the burgeoning teen romance stuff. There's a little bit more of that in the remake. Now, I don't mean to say that it's inauthentic or it's like saccharine or crummy. It's pretty well handled in the remake. And I thought Cody Smith-McPhee and Chloe Grace Moretz are wonderful together. They have a great dynamic. It's really, they have excellent chemistry. One thing I want to bring up, in the remake, Owen is obsessed with Now and Later candies. He keeps buying Now and Later candies. I never got the significance of that because that's not in the original. It's not in the novel.
Like an 80s.
Is it just an 80s reference?
80s reference, maybe like cheap 80s reference.
Is it more like, you know, you're my familiar now and I'll get one later?
It's also odd candy choice. So
For
maybe
a kid,
that's why.
Sure. Yeah. It's definitely a candy I associate more with older folks.
Yeah.
But I guess maybe the older folks of my life were 12 years old in 1982. I was a little younger, but I was on this earth.
I do want to talk about, now that we've sort of compared, contrasted, chatted about
and I think
both.
you probably know where we stand.
Yeah. There is going to be a new TV show coming out.
Yes.
So maybe you don't have to watch either movie. And
watch
instead
them.
you can
You should,
just
though.
the TV show,
But watch the
which
movies.
has been, it's a series. It's been officially ordered by Showtime. It's been given a 10-episode order. There's nobody really notable in the cast other than Grace Gummer, but doesn't look like she's in many episodes. So I'm not going to go through who's in it. That may change anyway. But I'll give you a quick plot summary of what the IMDb of the page says. So it looks like they have 10 named episodes and, you know, everyone's attached to it. So I think it might be in either production or post-production. It centers on Mark and his daughter Eleanor, whose lives were forever changed 10 years earlier when she was turned into a vampire. Locked in at age 12, perhaps forever, Eleanor lives a closed-in life, able to only go out at night while her father does his best to provide her with human blood in order to keep her alive.
Huh. So very different. They're it seems like they're picking out just that one element of the story and focusing on it,
Yep.
which is not a bad idea.
And it's going to be, you know, episodic. So I'm sure they can stretch out some of the plot points. I don't know how much it's going to take from the book, the original film. It is named after the original film.
It kind of has a little bit of the Road vibe to it. That sort of father-child dynamic at the end of their rope, at the end of all things.
Yep.
That's neat. It kind of reminds me a little of that Jeff Nichols movie, Midnight Special with Michael Shannon, where he's the dad and his son has superpowers and he's just trying to keep him safe, basically.
I did not see that, I don't think.
It's good. It's good. I mean, I'm always interested in that dynamic, especially as I get older of, you know, it's very easy to say, I'll do anything for you, but when that's tested,
Oh, yeah.
what will you do? How much of yourself will you chip away at?
We need to talk about Kevin.
Oh God, that movie. And honestly, we need to talk about Ezra Miller. That's more importantly.
Geez.
Someone needs to talk about him.
I think we need to cut that part because
Someone
I don't want to associate Ezra Miller with this podcast.
Listen,
It's going to go down.
They are a charming actor with a lot of talent, and I desperately hope they get some help soon.
But they are not a very good human.
They seem to be pretty tough to be around.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's Make Remake.
Thanks for joining our second episode of Make Remake.
Yeah, honestly, watch either of these. They're both really, really good. The original's better, but they're both really good.
All right.
Bye, everybody.
See you next time. Terror in Tandem is written, produced, and recorded by Laura and Richard Mathiasen, and edited and mixed by Richard Mathiasen. Our theme was written and performed by Carrie Denver, and all other music was written and performed by David Suspanic. All opinions expressed on this podcast are our own and should be taken as such. Thanks for listening, and please remember to give us a like, a review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. See you next time. We're standing right behind